Hey guys, tonight we'll travel back to the soft candlelit halls of Sanssouci Palace, where the air carried the quiet scent of tea leaves and parchment. Tonight, we'll slow down time itself and wander gently through the tranquil rituals of Frederick the Great. Imagine yourself beneath chandeliers that flicker like sleepy stars, while the moon hums outside over the gardens of Potsdam. You might think 18th century royal life was all fanfare and trumpet calls, but if you had to live by those timetables, you'd probably need a nap halfway through the coronation. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The evening settles gently over Potsdam. The sun folds behind the western hills, leaving a violet haze that drifts across the terraced vineyards of Sanssouci. You walk the gravel path toward the palace, each step muffled, as though the stones themselves are reluctant to disturb the quiet. Ahead, the windows glow with candlelight, soft, golden, alive. Inside, the hush is immediate. It has the kind of silence that carries 1,000 small sounds. The faint ticking of a distant clock, the whisper of a curtain moving with the breeze, the quiet pulse of stillness itself. Somewhere within these rococo halls, Frederick II prepares his nightly tea. The air carries the scent of warm porcelain and dry leaves. It isn't just a fragrance, it's a feeling, a kind of invitation to breathe slower. Frederick built Sanssouci in 1747 as a retreat from power, a sanctuary for thought, music, and solitude. The name means without worry, and tonight that promise still lingers in the walls. The corridors glow in amber light. Portraits half smile from their frames. The marble floors mirror the candle flames, and the palace seems to exhale in rhythm with the night. A servant passes silently, a silver tray in hand. No step echoes. No word is spoken. On the tray perhaps teaspoons, perhaps a folded note confirming the Bohemian leaves have been measured exactly. The latch clicks behind him, gentle and final, like the closing of a thought. Then Frederick appears. Tall, slender, wrapped in a robe the color of parchment. He moves with the care of someone who lives deliberately. His powdered hair catches the firelight, making him almost spectral, a figure half remembered by time. He pauses by the window. The gardens outside shimmer beneath the rising moon. The king inhales deeply, as though drawing patience from the cool air. It is said that Frederick brewed his evening tea in absolute silence. No voice, no music, no interruption. Some say it was discipline. Others call it meditation. You imagine him lifting the teapot, eyes fixed on the spiral of steam, the slow curl of water meeting leaf. The motion itself becomes language. A clock chimes, low and resonant. Each note lingers longer than the last, stretching time into stillness. You listen as the echoes fade, blending with the soft flicker of candlelight. The night deepens, and the palace seems to settle into itself. You drift along the corridor in your mind, the pale blue panels, the gilded edges that catch the light, the curved ceiling like a seashell's interior. Everything here seems designed for contemplation. Even the air feels weighted, thick with wax and lavender, a perfume of peace. The king sits by a small round table near the hearth. Flames shiver quietly in the grate. Porcelain cups gleam like frozen music under their cobalt patterns. Frederick's hands move with delicate certainty, measuring, pouring, stirring. He counts to 4 before setting down the spoon, a small ritual of precision, the rhythm of calm itself. Steam drifts upward. Candles lean slightly toward it, as if bowing to the scent. An open score lies nearby, a page half turned. Frederick was a musician as much as a monarch. Perhaps the melody forming in his thoughts is as slow and warm as the tea he sips. If serenity had a tempo, it would match the gentle beat of his heart. Outside, a breeze slides through the vines. The air carries the sweetness of soil and grape leaves. A moth brushes against the window pane tap an almost invisible gesture. The king does not move. He is listening to something quieter than sound. Sanssouci was his refuge, far from Berlin's command and ceremony. Here, order became art. Every book aligned, every chair precisely angled, every object placed in balance. There is comfort in that arrangement, the reassurance that even chaos can be made graceful. A small dog curls at Frederick's feet and sighs. The king smiles faintly. He lifts the cup again, watches the surface tremble, and drinks. You imagine the taste, earthy, floral, slightly bitter, the flavor of patience made tangible. Time softens. The candle melts lower. A log shifts in the hearth. You realize your own breathing has slowed, matching the quiet choreography of his ritual. The silence isn't empty. It's alive, filled with focus, steadiness, and presence. Through the window, the vineyards shimmer like a silver sea. Somewhere, an unseen fountain murmurs to itself. The sound loops endlessly, neither rushing nor fading. You begin to understand. Peace is not the absence of motion, but the mastery of rhythm. Frederick leans back, eyes half closed. Perhaps he's thinking of philosophy, or of music, or perhaps of nothing at all. Maybe he's simply listening to the cooling tea, the deepening night, the soft pulse of existence itself. You let the image settle inside you, the palace, the candlelight, the slow dance of steam. The air grows warmer. Thought and quiet blend until they are indistinguishable. And for a brief, still moment, you realize that the silence surrounding Frederick has reached you too. It flows through the candlelight, through the faint echo of the clock, through the steady rhythm of breath and warmth. The world outside the palace fades until only calm remains, soft, weightless, complete. You are no longer watching the king. You are sharing the same stillness, the same quiet pulse of thought and tea and moonlight. For now, you have entered the silence of Sanssouci. Night deepens over Sanssouci, and you're drawn toward the quiet heart of its warmth. From somewhere within the palace, a scent begins to bloom, faint at first, then fuller, like a secret exhaling. It drifts through the corridors, mingling with candle wax and polished wood, carrying the soft memory of distant fields. Dry hay after sunlight, a trace of honey, and something tenderly indefinable. You follow it to a small antechamber beside the king's study. There, the ritual begins. A servant approaches the table, every gesture deliberate, calm. Nothing clangs or breaks the air. Even the kettle's lid settles without a sound, as if it too honors the stillness. The tea leaves come from Bohemia, Frederick's favorite, grown in mountain soil, rich and patient. Long, fine, curled like script, they unfurl into golden light when steeped. You can almost taste it already, sweet but reserved, like a thought half remembered. Frederick had these leaves imported through Dutch merchants, refusing compromise despite their cost. To him, tea wasn't luxury. It was order. In the measured ritual of brewing, he found symmetry against the chaos of rule. The servant opens a tin etched with latticework. Inside, the leaves whisper, a dry sound close to breath. He measures them by weight, not sight, each motion rehearsed, each pause intentional. No waste, no haste. The water waits, patient and steaming. The palace seems to breathe with him, approving of the pace, the reverence, the silence that turns ordinary tea into something close to prayer. Steam curls upward from the kettle, soft and silver in the lamplight. The air hums with a quiet sigh, the sound of patience finding form. A floorboard creaks gentle, grounding. The servant pours the water in 2 measured stages, pausing midway to let the heat rest. Frederick once recorded the perfect temperature in a private notebook, tested with a French thermometer. Those pages were never found. Historians still wonder why, as if the secret itself preferred to remain warm and hidden. You picture him standing nearby, observing with his calm, steady gaze. His fingers rest lightly on the edge of the porcelain cup, as if feeling the vibration of the pour. To the king, even water had character. It could be too young, too restless, too heavy with minerals. But tonight, it is perfect. You can almost hear the first drop hitting the leaves, a sound so soft that you could mistake it for a sigh. The color deepens. The fragrance unfolds fully now, richer, layered, the warmth of honey meeting the cool green of meadow grass. If serenity had a scent, this would be it. It seems to slow time itself, thickening the air with calm. You take a breath through your imagination and feel it settle behind your eyes, gentle and grounding. Frederick waits. He always waits exactly 4 minutes before tasting the brew, though no one knows how he times it. The golden clock nearby ticks with composure, but he never glances at it. Perhaps he measures by intuition, or by the rhythm of his thoughts. Waiting, after all, is an art. You might think 4 minutes is long, but here, even seconds seem to move with courtesy. As the infusion rests, he arranges the setting. A porcelain saucer, a small spoon, a folded napkin, and beside it, a single biscuit no larger than a coin. Nothing more. To eat too much during tea, he once remarked, would distract the conversation between water and leaf. You smile quietly. Even kings, it seems, invent rules to justify their quirks. When the tea is ready, the servant pours it through a fine silver strainer, catching the tiny flecks that float like golden dust. The liquid glows faintly amber. The smell fills the room, touching every surface. It's a scent that hums rather than speaks, a background melody of warmth and order. You imagine it clinging to the curtains, to the pages of open books, to the very air that lingers long after the ritual ends. Outside, the night air carries faint traces of it through the halls. You can almost follow the aroma as it seeps under the door, curling along the corridor where the marble cools under moonlight. The scent mingles with wax and paper, with the ghost of music that might have been played earlier in the evening. Sanssouci, for all its grandeur, now feels like a teapot itself warm, enclosed, gently breathing. Frederick finally lifts the cup. His hand trembles slightly, not from weakness, but from a kind of reverence. The first sip is small. He closes his eyes, tasting for the precise harmony between sweetness and earth. There's no reaction on his face, only stillness. The act itself is its own satisfaction. The warmth moves down his throat, spreading a quiet that no empire could ever provide. You imagine joining him, sitting opposite, your own cup reflecting the candlelight. The air feels weightless, as if conversation itself would disturb the peace. You take a sip, too, at least in your mind. The taste is gentle, layered, both ancient and familiar. It reminds you of autumn afternoons, of paper turning crisp at the edges, of moments that don't demand anything from you. Frederick places the cup down carefully, aligning it with the saucer's pattern. He gazes toward the window. Outside, the vines of the terrace glisten faintly, drops of dew catching moonlight like tiny mirrors. The silence is not empty. It's full of invisible life. Somewhere, a cricket starts a hesitant rhythm, then stops, as if realizing it has entered the wrong concert. You almost laugh quietly to yourself. Even nature seems shy in the presence of this calm. The room cools slightly as the tea disappears. The king exhales, a breath that seems to dissolve the last tension from his shoulders. He does not smile, but the corners of his mouth soften. In that moment, he is not ruler, strategist, or composer. He is simply a man with a cup of warm tea, sitting in his chosen solitude. You linger on the image, candlelight trembling over porcelain, the faint swirl of remaining steam, the sense of a world held still by discipline and delight. The scent lingers, a quiet signature of Bohemia, of patience, of a ritual perfected beyond reason. And as you breathe it in once more, you can almost believe that calm, too, can be learned one cup at a time. The air inside the palace shifts as twilight fades to gold. You walk softly toward Frederick's study, where the scent of Bohemian tea still lingers, woven through the quiet like an invisible ribbon. The door stands half open, and warm light spills out a dim amber glow that looks almost tangible, as if you could hold it in your hand. Inside, the study is a sanctuary of polished mahogany and quiet discipline. The desk dominates the room, wide and solid, its surface worn smooth by years of quills and scores. Every edge gleams faintly under the candles, each flicker revealing a trace of scratches, the small marks of human persistence. The last threads of sunset seep through the tall windows, catching on brass handles and gilded spines. Outside, the gardens fade into silhouette, their green surrendering to soft blue shadow. You pause at the threshold, letting your eyes adjust. The silence has a texture here, layered and deliberate. Somewhere, the faint hum of the evening insects seeps in through the glass, mingling with the low tick of the golden clock in the corner. Frederick sits at his desk, upright but relaxed, his quill balanced between long fingers. Before him lies a single sheet of parchment half filled, half waiting. The ink glows faintly wet. He is not writing decrees tonight, nor letters to generals or philosophers. Instead, he sketches music small, delicate lines, as though sound itself were something that could be coaxed rather than commanded. You imagine the moment just before a melody finds its shape, that hush where thought trembles on the edge of becoming something more. The candle nearest him sputters briefly, sending shadows rippling across the room. They dance across the shelves, where volumes of philosophy and poetry rest in orderly rows. Spines of Voltaire, Rousseau, the Roman classics all gathered like quiet companions. The king keeps them close, not for show, but because he trusts the silence between their pages. Frederick's study window faces west, perfectly placed to catch the final sigh of daylight. Outside, the sky melts into copper and rose, soft streaks of color fading toward smoke gray. For a few quiet minutes, that glow spills across his desk, turning ink, paper, and dust motes into tiny fires of gold. You can almost feel the warmth gentle, fleeting, human. He leans closer, adding a few deliberate notes. The quill glides in calm precision, each line a measured breath. Nearby rests a glass ink pot, clear as still water, and a folded parchment tied with blue ribbon, perhaps a sonata, perhaps only a thought unfinished. History will remember Frederick as a composer king, author of more than 100 works. Yet here, beneath the soft dusk, he writes for no one but himself, for the quiet joy of order, and the solace found in sound. Among his works, there is one that no one has ever heard. Rumor holds that it remains sealed in a small cabinet near this very desk, its key tucked away in a drawer, marked only by the letter F. The piece, it said, was written for no audience at all. Only once each spring, Frederick would unlock the drawer, glance at the pages, and close it again without playing a single note. No one knows why. Perhaps it was a melody too personal to share, or perhaps silence was the truest version of it. The evening air thickens with calm. The candles lean slightly in the draught, their flames long and steady. The scent of parchment, ink, and the last trace of tea fills the space. You can almost hear the page dry, the faint crisp sound of ink meeting air. The king rests the quill and studies the unfinished score. He hums under his breath, so quietly that it's less sound than vibration. Outside, the world shifts into night. A servant lights a lantern in the corridor, and its glow joins the fading daylight, blending gold and silver into something softer. The vines on the terrace move gently in the breeze. A moth drifts near the window, brushes the glass, then settles as if to listen. Frederick sits back, eyes lifted toward the window. For a long moment, he watches the horizon disappear. The last color drains from the sky, leaving only the first stars and their trembling reflections on the glass. The music on the page waits patiently, a thought suspended in ink. You imagine how it might sound slow, deliberate, a pattern of calm, each note spaced like the steps of someone walking carefully down a moonlit corridor. The king sets his quill aside and folds his hands. Perhaps he is reviewing the melody in his mind. Perhaps he's comparing it to the quiet outside. It's difficult to tell where the music ends and the silence begins. Both seem to belong here, as if the study itself were built to contain them equally. The candle nearest the desk burns lower, the wax pooling like amber. The flame flickers once, then steadies. Frederick leans forward again, drawing a line across the margin, a small correction, the kind that no one else would notice but him. Perfection, after all, is not a destination but a posture. He doesn't chase it. He simply aligns himself toward it, like a sunflower turning toward the sun. You take a slow breath, almost afraid to disturb the balance. The air feels alive with thought, but not heavy. There's serenity in the repetition of it all, the scratch of the quill, the ticking of the clock, the rhythm of breath. In this room, creation doesn't feel like labor. It feels like listening to something already present, waiting to be written down. At last, he stands. The parchment remains where it is, unfinished, shining faintly in the candlelight. He doesn't blow out the flame yet. Instead, he gazes once more at the note's tiny black marks that somehow hold entire worlds of sound. Then he turns, hands clasped behind his back, and walks toward the tea table. The porcelain gleams softly, waiting. Behind him, the ink dries, and the golden hour fades completely. The study becomes a room of candlelight and memory, of silence and invisible melody. You watch it all settle into stillness. The night takes its place. For a while, it feels as though the music itself has grown tired of motion, settling gently into the stillness, breathing quietly beside the fading light. The air outside feels different, cooler, looser, alive with the hush that follows the fading of daylight. You step into the gardens of Sanssouci just as the last candle in the western corridor flickers out. The world beyond the palace walls is veiled in a soft silver mist, each breath of wind carrying the faint perfume of grape leaves and damp stone. The night here doesn't arrive with darkness. It arrives with stillness. The terraces descend in wide, graceful steps, the famed Rococo design of Sanssouci's vineyard gardens. Built in tiers of sandstone and vines, they stretch downward from the palace like a quiet melody cast in green. In daylight, they shine with orderly brilliance, each row of grapes shaped and measured by the king's own taste for balance. But under moonlight, the garden softens, lines blur. The vines seem to breathe, the marble statues shimmer as if half awake, and the air hums with invisible motion. Frederick walks alone here most evenings before tea. His steps are unhurried, almost ceremonial, as though he's moving through the rhythm of an unwritten song. You can picture him now, hands clasped behind his back, head slightly bowed, his mind elsewhere, perhaps still tracing the melody he left unfinished in his study. The gravel crunches softly beneath his shoes, the sound steady and familiar, marking time against the whispering leaves. Above, the trees sway in gentle conversation. The leaves rustle not in words, but in patterns, long sighs, and short murmurs, rising and falling like breath. The breeze glides through the rows of vines, brushing against the statues that guard the terraces. Each one, carved in elegant detail, bears the pale gleam of moonlight. Apollo, Bacchus, and the fauns frozen in mid-dance. And among them, always, is Pan, the god of quiet wildness, standing at the center of the lower terrace, flute in hand, his marble lips forever parted as if about to play. It is said that every evening, just as twilight deepens, a single sparrow comes to rest upon Pan's shoulder. No one knows when the ritual began, but it has been observed for years. The servants whisper about it sometimes, calling it the king's little omen. The bird never fails to appear, never chooses another statue, and never lingers longer than the length of a sigh. Tonight, The air holds its breath for that moment. The wind slows, and the fountains, those circular pools of pale stone, reflect the moon so clearly that it seems to float both above and below you. Water drips softly from the mouths of carved dolphins, each drop like the ticking of a distant clock. Somewhere in the hedges, a night insect chirps, steady as a metronome. And then, as if on cue, the sparrow arrives. A small shape gliding through the silver air, wings whispering more than flapping. It lands upon Pan's shoulder and settles there, chest rising and falling in the same slow rhythm as the garden itself. Frederick pauses a few steps away, not startled, not smiling, just watching. It is a quiet exchange between two creatures of habit, the king and the bird, each faithful to their hour. The sparrow tilts its head once, then twice. The breeze shifts again, brushing through the vines. Somewhere deeper in the garden, a lantern glows faintly through the mist, marking the path back toward the tea room. But Frederick doesn't turn yet. He lingers at the base of the terrace, gazing across the pool, where ripples form gentle rings around the reflection of the moon. The rococo symmetry that defines Sanssouci so deliberate, so measured, feels almost tender at night. The geometry doesn't constrain the space, it soothes it. Each step, each statue, each low wall carries the weight of human intention, softened by nature's patience. The vines climb, the moss spreads, and the marble glows faintly beneath its thin layer of dew. Nothing here rushes, nothing demands. In the distance, the faint outline of the palace crowns the hill, its dome framed by tall linden trees. The windows shimmer with candlelight, but no sound escapes. From here, Sanssouci looks less like a royal estate and more like a dream of one light hovering above the mist, tethered by silence. You can almost imagine the centuries compressing into this moment. The same moon reflected in the same pools, watched by unseen eyes long before tonight. Frederick bends slightly, plucking a fallen grape leaf from the gravel. He studies it for a moment, its delicate veins, its faint scent of earth and fruit, then lets it fall again. The gesture feels like punctuation, a small pause between thoughts. His gaze returns to the statue of Pan, where the sparrow still rests. Some historians, years later, would write about the king's garden walks with fascination. They'd describe them as moments of contemplation, a way to gather his thoughts before his nightly tea. Others suggested he sought solitude not from people, but from time itself. He tried to outpace the centuries, one wrote, by walking through them slowly. Perhaps both are true. The sparrow stirs, hops once along the statue's flute, and then, as gently as it came, takes flight. It disappears into the shadow of the vine terraces, its movement barely more than a breath in the cool night. The king watches until the sound of wings fades completely, leaving only the quiet of water and wind. He turns then, following the path upward. Gravel crunches beneath his feet, echoing faintly off the stone balustrades. Behind him, the garden exhales a long, slow sound as the mist begins to thicken. The air smells faintly of soil, of ripened grapes, of marble cooled by evening dew. The statues fade into silhouettes, and the fountains murmur on, their rhythm eternal. At the top of the terrace, the palace doors glow with candlelight once more. Frederick pauses at the threshold, taking one last glance down over the garden. From above, it looks like a pattern of memory terraces, cascading like verses, statues standing like commas between thoughts. The moon sits perfectly centered above it all, framed by the curve of the sky. You can almost hear the silence hum. The night deepens, the garden drifts into sleep, and Frederick, serene as the mist that clings to the marble steps, turns softly toward the glow within, returning to his silent sanctuary. The air inside the tea room feels almost weightless, like it's holding its breath for something sacred. The candles flicker along the curved walls, their reflections multiplying across the porcelain surfaces. At the center of the round room rests the table pure white Meissen porcelain, polished until it gleams like frozen light. You can almost feel the temperature of it from across the room, cool and smooth, untouched by time. The table seems to glow from within. It does not boast. It hums quietly in elegance. Each curve of its legs, each delicate ridge of glaze, carries the soft perfection of human patience. Candlelight dances on its surface, bending and rippling in small waves like sunlight over shallow water. The room itself was designed for this moment to let light behave like a guest. The Meissen workshop, born in the early 18th century, was Germany's first to unlock the secret of true European porcelain. Before that, such luxury came only from China, treasured like alchemy. The story goes that Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony, imprisoned the alchemist Johann Packer until he could make white gold. Years later, he succeeded, and in Meissen porcelain became the pride of the continent. Frederick the Great adored it. To him, it was not just luxury, but philosophy, a perfect union of art and science. He admired how something so fragile could survive centuries simply by being still. His own collection filled shelves and cabinets throughout Sanssouci, but none were as personal as the set now arranged upon this table. The teapot, cup, and saucer shimmer under the flame. Their edges carry thin lines of gold, so delicate they might disappear if you blink too long. The teapot's handle curves like a question mark, and on its side, almost invisible until the candlelight hits at just the right angle, are engraved musical notes, tiny, graceful, and deliberate. They are not decorative. They are a melody. Frederick himself had them etched into the porcelain many years ago, a few measures from a flute sonata he composed during one long winter in Potsdam. The melody loops softly around the pot's body, like a whisper circling a secret. For years, no one noticed it. The notes were shallow, half hidden under the glaze, until a curator in Dresden discovered the set centuries later. It rests now in a glass case, where light reveals what music once hid. Back in this quiet room, the porcelain seems almost alive. You hear the soft slide of a silver tray as a servant sets it down, every motion deliberate and calm. The cups touch lightly, a fragile sound, tender enough to soothe a restless mind. Frederick enters without announcement. His steps are measured, shoes tapping once, twice, then falling silent on the polished floor. He moves as though continuing a centuries-old ritual that needs no words. The air carries faint traces of beeswax, candle smoke, and the lingering sweetness of Bohemian tea brewed earlier in the evening. His eyes rest on the porcelain table before him. To others, it might be decoration. To him, it is memory made tangible. Each piece holds a story: the teapot from Saxony, the Meissen cup, the sugar bowl once gifted by a visiting composer who believed bitterness required softening. Frederick never agreed. He said sugar made the tea forget its purpose. He sits in his familiar carved chair. The wood creaks gently, welcoming him. Candlelight quivers along the porcelain's curve, and for a breath, even the stillness feels alive. In the reflection of the teapot, the flame dances upside down. It stretches and folds with every tiny draft in the room. The porcelain captures that movement and softens it, turning it into a rhythm too slow for the eye to follow. Everything here, light, air, stillness, seems to move at the pace of thought. On the far wall hangs a small mirror framed in gilded wood. Its surface blurs the reflection of the table, but even that distortion feels gentle, like a watercolor painting beginning to fade. You catch fragments of Frederick's outline, the slope of his shoulder, the narrow tilt of his head, the way his hand rests lightly on the table's edge. The Meissen porcelain was known for its perfect balance of strength and fragility. It could outlast centuries if cared for, but a careless touch could shatter it. Perhaps that was what the king loved most about it, the reminder that beauty demands stillness. You can almost hear him thinking it, though his lips never move. A servant pours hot water from a silver kettle. The steam rises in graceful curls, clouding the air between the teapot and candlelight. For a heartbeat, everything in the room blurs the white porcelain, the flame, the pale gold of Frederick's sleeve, and you feel as though the world itself is steeping. The water strikes the bottom of the pot with a low, comforting sound. Not a splash, but a sigh. The steam thickens and swirls upward, carrying the faint aroma of honey and meadow herbs. The porcelain hums softly as the heat spreads through it, and you wonder if the melody engraved along its side warms too, invisible notes vibrating just beneath the glaze. Frederick waits, motionless. He times this moment precisely 4 minutes, no more, no less. The candle nearest him flickers, casting a fleeting shimmer over the gold-rimmed saucer. Each flicker feels like a quiet heartbeat, syncing perfectly with the measured breath of the king. There is something meditative about it all: porcelain, flame, silence. Even the air behaves, content to linger in stillness. Beyond these walls, life clatters forward. Cups collide, voices overlap, clocks hurry. But here, time folds in on itself, patient and unhurried. After 4 minutes, Frederick reaches for the teapot. His hand moves with graceful precision, honed by years of ritual. The amber stream flows slowly, reflecting the candle's golden pulse. Each night, the cup fills to the exact same height. He pauses, watching the surface tremble, then lifts it gently. Cool porcelain meets his lips. Warmth travels through centuries of craft to this one quiet sip. The flame steadies again, casting soft light across the white glaze. In that hush, even the table seems to breathe. Porcelain, perfected through patience, holding both silence and song. If calm had a color, it would surely be white soft as porcelain, weightless as steam, holding within it the quiet patience of unspoken thought. The cup sits before you, its thin rim catching the candle's faint glow. Steam rises in soft spirals, wrapping the air in a sleepy warmth. You watch as Frederick reaches for a slender silver spoon, its handle engraved with a faded crest. His hand moves with precision, not hurried, not hesitant, but guided by a rhythm known only to him. He stirs the tea 3 times, each motion tracing a perfect circle. The spoon makes no sound against the porcelain, as if even the metal understands the quiet that reigns here. He sets the spoon aside, exactly parallel to the saucer's edge. Then he waits. 4 minutes, always 4. No more, no less. You find yourself holding your breath with him, caught in the stillness that fills the room. The world outside Sanssouci continues to spin. Horses clatter on cobblestones. A city hums faintly, but inside, time loosens its grip. Frederick lifts his gaze to the flame flickering near the window. The reflection dances across the teapot's surface, making it seem alive. You sense that the ritual is not about tea at all. It's about control, patience, and peace, the kind that doesn't need to be declared. The king once told a visiting scholar that clarity comes only when one's thoughts move as slowly as leaves floating on still water. You suspect that that's what this moment is for, to make his thoughts drift just enough to see them clearly. Historically, Frederick the Great was known for his ascetic habits. Unlike other nobles of his age, he rarely drank wine and refused the heavy banquets that filled Prussian evenings. Instead, he chose tea, a modest rebellion brewed in porcelain. His ministers sometimes teased him for this, whispering that a king should toast his empire, not steep it. But Frederick ignored them. He believed that wine blurred reason, while tea sharpened it. A soldier's mind, he once said, must remain as clear as boiled water. He waits the last few seconds, eyes half closed. Then he lifts the cup, just slightly, and takes a sip so small you almost miss it. The tea touches his lips like a note in a melody he's played 1,000 times. He doesn't swallow right away. Instead, he lets the warmth settle on his tongue, as if listening for meaning and flavor. Each part of this ritual feels like meditation disguised as habit. The way he stirs 3 times, not 2, not 4. The way he pauses before drinking, marking time by the sound of his own heartbeat. You begin to realize how the smallest motions, when done with attention, become doorways to calm. Outside, a faint breeze brushes the curtains. The flame flickers once, and steadies again. Frederick doesn't react. His focus remains absolute. You think about how this moment, this quiet act of waiting and tasting, might have shaped the fate of nations. There are rumors among historians that he drank tea to compose himself before battle, that his calm decisions were steeped as carefully as his Bohemian blend. He brewed peace before war, one historian wrote, and that may have been his greatest strategy. It's a charming theory, you think. Even if it's only half true, it feels right. The idea of a king, sitting alone at night, using silence to prepare for thunder, it's oddly comforting. You imagine him in the war tent years earlier, steam rising from a small cup while soldiers murmured outside, and how perhaps in that moment the weight of an empire rested lightly on his fingertips. But here, in Sanssouci, there is no war, only ritual. The gentle repetition of movement, the tiny tremble of porcelain, the breath between moments. You notice how Frederick's face softens as he drinks, the sharp lines around his eyes smoothing into something almost kind. Maybe the tea doesn't calm his mind so much as it reminds him he has one. The air smells faintly of bergamot and brass polish. Somewhere deep in the palace, a clock ticks with a polite, distant sound. Each second feels like a bow drawn slowly across the string of a cello. You follow its rhythm and find yourself relaxing into it. The ritual begins to feel contagious. You want to slow your breathing to match his, to let your thoughts drift in the same unhurried current. He finishes the cup, places it gently back on the saucer, and rests his hands in his lap. There's no sigh, no expression of satisfaction, only silence, dignified and complete. For him, the ritual is both an ending and a beginning. The cup may be empty, but the mind it cleared remains full. It's strange, you think, how such small gestures can hold so much gravity. Stirring 3 times, waiting 4 minutes, holding a breath longer than comfort allows. In a world that worships speed, this kind of slowness feels almost radical. You imagine the palace itself absorbing the energy of it, storing peace in its walls like warmth in stone. Frederick looks toward the window again. Outside, the garden glimmers faintly under the moon. The reflection of its terraces appears in the glass like another world layered atop this one. He watches for a long time, unmoving. You can't help but smile at the thought this mighty ruler, sitting still for minutes, mastering the art of doing absolutely nothing. Had he lived in another century, perhaps he would have written a book on mindfulness. Instead, he left behind porcelain, music, and meticulous plans, never knowing that his quiet tea ritual would outlast his conquests, remembered not for discipline or power, but for the rare and steady peace it offered to a restless world. The candle burns lower, its flame a slow heartbeat in the dimming room. The air cools, wrapping everything in gentle stillness. Beside the saucer, Frederick's silver spoon rests untouched, reflecting a final glint of gold before surrendering to shadow. In the hush, it seems to murmur a voice, not of sound but of presence, reminding that true strength requires no motion, no display. Patience, it whispers, is a quiet kind of power. As the final curl of steam disappears into the quiet air, you begin to understand the lesson hidden in this gentle ritual. Calm is not something that arrives. It is something you create sip by sip, breath by breath, until the world's noise thins and softens, leaving only stillness steady and luminous within you. The tea has settled now, leaving only a faint warmth in the porcelain cup and a trace of fragrance in the air. You can almost see the calm, shimmering like mist across the room. Frederick rises slowly, every motion measured, and walks toward a nearby table where a wooden flute rests beside a stack of manuscripts. The candlelight trembles gently over the instrument's smooth surface. It gleams faintly, like honey under thin glass. He lifts the flute with the care of someone greeting an old friend. For a moment, he simply holds it, feeling the weight, the temperature, the balance. It's a ritual not unlike tea, an act of attention, of deliberate slowness. Then, as the air stills completely, he brings it to his lips. The first note emerges barely above a whisper. It moves through the room like a thread of silver, curling around the edges of the porcelain table, winding through the candlelight, soft enough to blend with the sound of your breathing. You feel it in your chest before you truly hear it, like the faint hum of a dream beginning to take shape. Frederick the Great was more than a soldier or king. He was, in truth, a musician at heart. His teacher, Johann Joachim Quantz, had once been one of the greatest flutists in Europe, and Frederick studied under him for years. History remembers their lessons as rigorous, but filled with affection. Quantz wrote hundreds of pieces for him, each one polished for the royal student's breath and technique. It's said that Quantz crafted a special flute for Frederick, a golden one, weighing more than a kilogram. The instrument's tone was rumored to be unlike any other, clear, mournful, almost human. No one knows what became of it. Some say it was hidden in the palace after Frederick's death. Others believe it melted away in war. Perhaps it still sleeps somewhere, buried under layers of time, waiting for another quiet night to sing. The melody deepens. Each note drifts slowly, spaced with intention. There is no hurry, no bravado, only quiet control. The sound seems to hover in the air, neither leaving nor lingering, a perfect balance between presence and fading. You notice how it pairs with the memory of tea, the breath in, the breath out, the way heat meets air. Music and ritual are the same language spoken through different senses. Frederick plays with his eyes closed. His brow softens, the lines of power and command erased by the gentleness of tone. The flute becomes an extension of his thought, shaping sound the way the tea earlier shaped stillness. You can almost see the air vibrating, weaving invisible circles that overlap with the faint curls of steam still lingering above the teacup. Outside, the wind brushes against the window panes, adding its own faint accompaniment. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls, but even that sound seems to join the music instead of interrupting it. The palace holds its breath, listening. You realize that this is what true solitude sounds like, not emptiness, but fullness without noise. Frederick once wrote in a letter that he found peace in the flute because the sound moves faster than thought, yet slower than sorrow. It's a curious way to describe music, but here, in the flickering light, it makes sense. Each note feels like an exhalation of something heavy he no longer needs to carry. You sit quietly in the scene, your mind beginning to move at the same rhythm as his breath. The melody flows, patient and unhurried. It wanders through soft major keys, touches a brief sadness, then drifts back to calm. It feels like watching clouds change shape impermanent, yet somehow complete. The candles burn lower. Their flames grow shorter, steadier. The reflections on the porcelain table pulse faintly with each shift in tone. The air grows warmer, as if the music itself has a temperature. You think of how the tea's warmth earlier seeped through porcelain into the king's hands. Now, the music seems to do the same for the room. It fills the empty corners with something invisible but tangible. In history books, Frederick's flute playing is often treated as a curiosity, a hobby of a soldier philosopher. But sitting here, you can tell it's more than that. This isn't the performance of a king. It's the prayer of a human being who needed silence to have a shape. You wonder if every empire, every palace, secretly depends on moments like this, soft, fragile ones no one ever writes down. He pauses between phrases, lowering the flute slightly. The silence that follows is not absence, but echo, as though the air itself remembers the melody. You notice how your heartbeat has slowed, syncing with the invisible rhythm of his breath. Even the flicker of the candle now feels deliberate, part of the performance. When he resumes playing, The sound grows gentler, descending like evening mist settling over a garden. It doesn't rise or fall dramatically. It simply exists, spreading calm the way tea spreads warmth. You can almost hear the harmony of the two rituals, the pouring, the stirring, the breathing, the playing, all merging into one continuous act of awareness. The final note lingers, faint and pure, before fading completely. The king lowers his flute and lets his arms rest on his lap. The silence that follows is complete but kind. You feel as though the room itself exhales. Frederick remains still, eyes half open, a small smile flickering across his face. He sets the flute down gently beside the teacup. Two tools of peace, side by side, one for stillness, one for sound. The candlelight trembles once more, and you realize the night has deepened without your noticing. The palace outside is asleep, but inside, this quiet ritual continues to hum softly in the air. You take one last breath and let the scene settle inside you. The faint trace of tea, the echo of golden notes, the calm of a king who found serenity not in conquest, but in rhythm and breath. Somewhere, unseen, the air still holds the final shimmer of the flute, soft, weightless, fading into quiet. It lingers like a thought that refuses to vanish, a gentle echo woven into the stillness. And in that hush, you realize, even silence, when listened to with care, can sing its own tender song. The music has faded, leaving only the soft hum of the evening air. The candles breathe quietly, their flames thin and steady, and the porcelain cup still holds a faint curl of steam. You watch as Frederick sits once again at his desk, the same mahogany surface that has seen 1,000 quiet nights like this one. The tea beside him is cooling, and his hand moves slowly toward a stack of parchment bound with a thin blue ribbon. He unties it carefully. The movement is deliberate, reverent even. Within the ribbon stack lie letters, some old, some freshly written, all with that same elegant slant of ink that was uniquely his. Each one bears the mark of long conversations, of thoughts exchanged across distance and time. The name that appears most often on these pages is Voltaire. Frederick and Voltaire corresponded for over 40 years, a conversation that outlasted wars, friendships, and the very century itself. Their letters were more than words. They were extensions of their minds' reflections of wit, philosophy, and the strange tenderness that forms between two people who never quite meet in peace, but never drift apart either. Tonight, Frederick takes up his quill and begins to write again. The scratch of the pen against parchment blends softly with the faint hiss of cooling tea. You can almost see the lines forming in the glow of candlelight, curved, graceful, full of precision. The ink glistens weightily before sinking into the fibers, as if the page itself is drinking his thoughts. Outside, fog begins to gather over the terraces of Sanssouci. It moves slowly, pressing its pale fingers against the window panes. Through the glass, the gardens blur into soft outlines, their symmetry lost in mist. Inside, that same mist seems to find its way into the room, mingling with the steam rising from the cup. The world becomes a watercolor of amber and silver. Frederick pauses, quill hovering mid-her. His gaze drifts to the porcelain rim, where a bead of tea trembles before falling back into the cup. You sense that he's not thinking about politics or war, but about language itself, the weight of words, how fragile they are, how they fade like breath on glass. There's a particular tenderness in this moment, the kind that belongs to reflection, to the act of speaking across distance. You imagine Voltaire sitting somewhere far away in France, his own candle flickering, reading Frederick's latest letter. Perhaps the same steam curls above his desk, carrying the same scent of tea and ink. Two minds, connected through silence and paper, mirrored by the same hour of night. Among the countless letters exchanged between them, history records one that never survived. A letter mentioned only in the diary of a royal servant, who wrote that the king read and burned it before dawn. No one knows what it contained. only that the act was deliberate, and that the ashes were swept away before sunrise. Historians still debate what was written in that vanished letter. Some say it was a confession, a moment of emotion that Frederick wished to erase. Others think it contained political doubts, thoughts too dangerous to preserve. But perhaps it was nothing more than a fragment of humanity, a few words written in the solitude of night, meant for no one's eyes at all. The tea has gone cold now. It's scent more memory than presence. Frederick dips his quill again, writes a final line, and seals the paper with a small press of wax. The seal catches the light, red against ivory. It looks like a drop of frozen sunlight. He leans back slightly, his face calm. The candle's glow outlines the edges of his features, softening them. The steam has almost vanished, leaving the air clear and still. You can feel the quiet deepening, like the slow settling of dust after a long day. Frederick gazes at the sealed letter, then at the others that surround it. Each one is a record of thought, yet each one will fade. Ink fades, paper cracks, but the motion, the act of writing, remains timeless. The same movement, repeated through centuries, hand to quill to page, word to silence. You sense the gentle continuity of it all, the tea, the letters, the music, the night. Nothing ends sharply here. Everything dissolves into the next thing. The letters and the steam become one gesture of release. The thoughts that once felt heavy now drift upward like the last faint curls of vapor, vanishing into air. Outside, the fog thickens over the palace gardens, softening the outlines of the statues and terraces. Inside, the candles burn low, their light trembling like memory. The faint scent of tea still lingers, though it is impossible to tell whether it comes from the cup or from some echo of evenings long past. Frederick finally stands, leaving the sealed letter to dry. He moves toward the window, resting one hand lightly on the glass. Beyond it, the mist hides everything, the garden, the world, the future. Yet somehow that seems fitting. Not everything needs to be seen to be understood. Not every letter needs to survive to be remembered. You linger with him in that thought, breathing slowly. The candle flickers once, and the reflection of the king's face in the window blurs into the fog outside. The line between present and memory fades completely. Somewhere beneath that tender veil of mist, a nightingale begins to sing. Its voice drifts through the garden like a thread of silver unraveling in the dark. The sound is soft, uncertain at first, then deepens, blooming slowly as if afraid to disturb the quiet. Each note ripples through the damp air, dissolving into the hush like ink spreading through water. You can almost see its rings of sound expanding, fading, returning to stillness. In that fragile song, the night itself seems to breathe, reminding you that even the calmest moments still hold a living pulse beneath their silence. And as the sound slowly dissolves, the scene begins to fade with at first the walls, then the candlelight, until only the warmth remains. The air carries a faint breath of parchment and the lingering sweetness of tea, hovering between memory and dream. Everything softens, blurs, and settles into quiet, as if the night itself has exhaled and decided, at last, to rest in peace. The night deepens gently over Sanssouci. The candle flames burn lower now, steady and pale, their golden circles of light pressed softly against the dark walls. In that hush, another sound emerges, barely noticeable at first, but soon impossible to ignore. The sound of the golden clock dot, it ticks like a heartbeat. Slow, even, constant. A measured rhythm that seems to hold the entire palace together. You can hear it echo faintly through the corridors, its voice blending with the stillness. In Frederick's study, the clock stands upon a carved pedestal of mahogany, its case gleaming under candlelight, every curve traced in gold. The hands move with grace, gliding as if through water. Frederick loved precision. He surrounded himself with it. There were more than 20 clocks placed throughout Sanssouci, each one imported from France, each one tuned to the same meticulous rhythm. The king would walk from room to room and hear them ticking together. A quiet chorus marking the passing of time, not as something to be feared, but as something to be observed now. In this deep hour of night, he sits before one of them. The teacup rests nearby, steam no longer rising, the fragrance faint and sweet. His gaze drifts to the clock face. The second hand moves in perfect silence, yet its presence fills the room. You imagine that for Frederick, this ticking was a form of music time transformed into sound. He takes a slow sip of tea, just as he does every night when the clock strikes the half hour. It is not habit for habit's sake, but a way of aligning himself with time itself. To sip, to breathe, to listen. The world outside may be chaos, but here, within these walls, every second knows its place. There is something soothing about the thought of man. A cup of tea and a clock whispering the steady truth of passing hours. The rhythm never falters. It does not hurry. It does not rest. It is a soft, eternal lullaby for those who understand the beauty of consistency. Frederick's relationship with time was both strict and tender. He ruled armies, wrote treatises, composed music, and yet he always returned to this one act of stillness. The golden clock, the quiet sip, the candle's glow. As though each tick and tock reminded him that life was not measured by battles or treaties, but by small, deliberate moments of awareness that you watch the pendulum swing, left to right, right to left. The motion is hypnotic. It seems to breathe with the same rhythm as Frederick himself. Each movement catches the light for an instant, then releases it. Like a heartbeat exhaling into eternity, that among all his clocks, there was one that became legend. It stood in his private chamber, a gift from Paris, gilded and engraved with delicate floral motifs. Servants recorded that it was the king's favorite. When Frederick passed away, that clock stopped, its mechanism halting at the exact hour of his death. No repair could wake it again. Even now, it remains frozen in time, its hands pointing eternally toward that moment, as if refusing to move beyond it. Some said the clock stopped out of reverence. Others whispered that it simply obeyed its master's will one last time. Whatever the reason, it became an unintentional memorial, a reminder that even the most precise rhythm eventually yields to silence. In this quiet scene, though the golden clock still breathes. Its hands glide faithfully across the enamel face, its tick blending with the faint crackle of candle wicks. Frederick closes his eyes, listening. You can almost feel how his thoughts slow to match the rhythm. Each second stretches, deepens, softens. The air thickens with calm. He takes another measured sip of tea. The warmth touches his lips, passes through him, and disappears into the quiet. The act feels timeless, as though it has always existed and always will. The ticking continues, marking not the passage of time, but the continuity of stillness. Somewhere down the corridor, another clock answers faintly, a companion voice, echoing through marble halls. Then another joins it, and another. The palace hums softly with these synchronized heartbeats of brass and gold. The sound travels through wood and stone, touching every room like a whisper. You realize this was how Frederick kept his world balanced, not through control, but through harmony. He opens his eyes again, glancing once more at the gilded face. His reflection is faintly visible in the glass, a pale figure framed by light and time. He smiles, a small motion that barely disturbs the air. Perhaps he's thinking of that stopped clock, or perhaps of how fragile the boundary is between motion and stillness, between the living and the remembered. The pendulum continues its patient swing. The candles burn lower. The hour approaches its end, and with it, a soft sense of completion. Frederick sets down his cup and folds his hands. For a moment, the ticking seems louder, not intrusive, but clear, like a voice saying, "This moment exists, this one." And now this one. And then, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm fades into background again. The sound merges with your breathing. You feel yourself relaxing, your thoughts sinking with the pendulum's gentle pace. Outside, the stars hang motionless above the misty gardens. Inside, the golden clock keeps watch, steady and faithful. Its glow reflects off porcelain, off polished wood, off the still surface of the tea. Every object seems to hum in quiet agreement, as if the room itself understands a secret too often forgotten, that time is not something that passes, but something that rests. It gathers softly around us, settling into folds of candlelight and porcelain, breathing at the same pace as the heart. The air feels suspended, patient, endlessly kind. Outside, the world continues unseen, but here, within these still walls, the hours no longer move forward. They linger, gentle and circular, wrapped in warmth. And so the night drifts onward, calm and whole, carried by the steady rhythm of a single, faithful clock each, tick a heartbeat in the darkness, measuring not time, but the stillness between moments. The night has settled completely now. The candles in Sanssouci have burned down to their smallest flames, trembling in their holders as if reluctant to fade. The air feels still, almost tender, but there is something else here too, something you can't quite name. It's not frightening, not strange in a sinister way. It's simply present. You notice it first in the faintest sound. A wooden creak. A whisper of movement that might just be the house breathing. The kind of sound that makes you pause and listen, not because you're afraid, but because it feels alive in an otherwise perfect stillness. The servants of Sanssouci knew this sound well. They would speak of it quietly, late at night, in the back halls behind the kitchens. A gentle creak of the tea-room chair. A sound that came long after the last candle had been snuffed, and the king's chamber sealed for rest. They swore that sometimes, in the hour before dawn, they heard it, the slow, unmistakable groan of polished wood, shifting under unseen weight. And yet, when they entered, the chair stood empty, perfectly placed before the porcelain table, the cup still resting where Frederick had left it. Frederick himself might have smiled at the story. He was, after all, a man who valued solitude to an almost sacred degree. During his tea hour, no one was allowed to enter the room. No servant, no guard, not even his dogs. The rule was simple: the king and his tea, and nothing else. Perhaps that is why, even now, the silence feels so thick here, as though the space itself remembers his desire for peace. The air holds a kind of respect, a hush that hums between the ticking of clocks and the rustle of the wind outside. You look toward the porcelain table again. The cup gleams faintly under the candlelight. The chair sits in its usual place, a high-backed seat of dark wood, carved with a pattern of vines that spiral toward the top. Its legs are smooth from years of polish, and when the wind passes through the room, a very gentle, almost polite breeze, it rocks just slightly. The movement is slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight to find comfort. Then stillness again. You half expect the air to carry a sigh. Historians wrote that Frederick's tea chamber was one of the few rooms in Sanssouci that faced directly west, catching the last of the sunlight before dusk. But it also sat along a corridor where the air would occasionally move of its own accord, rising and dipping as though guided by unseen hands. Some servants believed this draught was Frederick's spirit still walking his evening rounds, still guarding the quiet hour that had belonged only to him. They called it the moving air. And to this day, when the wind glides through the old windows and brushes against the silk curtains, it makes a soft sound, almost like a robe brushing across marble. It doesn't frighten visitors. It soothes them. It feels familiar, as if the house itself is exhaling in relief. There is comfort in the idea that some presences never leave, because they never needed to. Frederick's attachment to peace, to ritual, to the delicate clinking of porcelain and the whisper of tea, it was never about power or fear. It was about continuity, about a moment stretched so gently through time that it refuses to disappear. You can almost see him now, sitting there in the soft half-light. His eyes lowered, the golden clock ticking somewhere behind him, the faint scent of bergamot lingering in the air. The chair creaks once more, but this time it sounds like greeting rather than disturbance. There's a story among the caretakers of Sanssouci, quiet one never written down. They say that on still nights, when no tours run and no lights shine, the air in the tea chamber becomes different. The temperature cools slightly, though not uncomfortably. The curtains move without wind, and for a few seconds, the faintest outline of a figure can be seen in the reflection of the porcelain table. Not a ghost, but an impression like heat still shimmering where someone once sat. No one has ever captured it, though a few have tried. Cameras fail. The light never quite behaves the same way twice. And so, the story remains only that, a soft rumor, passed along from caretaker to caretaker, like an inheritance of quiet wonder. You stand by the doorway, feeling the air shift. The curtain lifts slightly, and the candle nearest the window flickers. It's easy to imagine that this moment has happened 1,000 times before, that it's happening right now for someone else in another century. Frederick's invisible guest may just be time itself, sitting down again at the table to rest. There's humor in the idea, isn't there? That even time, after running endlessly forward, might choose to stop here for a sip of tea. If that's true, then perhaps the creak of the chair isn't strange at all. It's simply an old friend settling in, taking a moment before moving on again. You breathe in the still air. It smells faintly of wax, paper, and something faintly metallic, the echo of age itself. You let the image of the empty chair fill your mind, and it doesn't feel eerie anymore. It feels right. A chair should be sat in. Silence should be shared. The candlelight bends. The shadow of the chair stretches long across the marble floor. You can hear the distant murmur of clocks, all keeping their gentle rhythm. The unseen guest, whoever or whatever it may be, disturbs nothing. It only adds to the harmony, an invisible note in a melody too soft for human ears. As you listen to the faint stirrings of the air, you sense how thin the veil is between presence and absence. Sometimes silence is only a voice speaking too softly to hear. The chair sighs once more. The candle steadies, and calm settles over the room. In that lingering stillness, the unseen guest seems to fade, or perhaps remains, woven quietly into the silence itself. The door to the library opens with a faint sigh, the kind that sounds like an old room remembering your touch. You step softly inside, and the world outside, the faint hum of the wind, the echo of footsteps in marble halls vanishes as though it were never there. Here, in this room of quiet minds and silent shelves, time folds neatly upon itself and begins to slow. The walls rise tall, wrapped entirely in books, hundreds, then thousands, their spines lined in leather of deep browns, faded reds, and pale greens. The air smells of age and wisdom, a delicate blend of dust, ink, and polish. You can almost taste the history in it, the quiet dedication of a life spent reading under candlelight. This is where Frederick often came after his tea. The flicker of the candles on his desk seemed to breathe with him as he turned each page, his cup resting nearby, still warm from the ritual before. He did not read quickly. He read like one might wander through a garden, stopping to admire the shape of each word, the sound of each sentence. Frederick's library was known to be his sanctuary, a space of solitude even deeper than his tea room. It held over 2,000 volumes, most of them written in French, his language of choice for philosophy and correspondence. He adored Voltaire, whose wit and clarity matched his own disciplined intellect. The two men exchanged letters for decades, their words dancing somewhere between admiration and rivalry. Yet in these walls, it was not Voltaire's cleverness that mattered most. It was the stillness that thinking required. Here, Frederick found peace not in answers, but in the act of pondering itself. You can almost see him seated beneath the great globe near the window, his posture erect, his gaze soft, his hand tracing the spine of a book before opening it with care. He often read Rousseau as well, though their ideas did not always align. Where Rousseau spoke of nature's purity, Frederick valued the precision of order. But perhaps that tension fascinated him, the dialogue between two worlds, both seeking peace, one through freedom, and the other through control. Some nights, the air in the library carried the faint aroma of bergamot and ink. The servant said he preferred to keep the windows slightly ajar, even in winter, so the room would never grow too heavy with the scent of wax. The cold would slip in and mingle with the warmth of the fire, creating a fine balance, like two notes held in harmony. There's a story quiet, almost forgotten, of a small book that was found long after Frederick's death. It was tucked behind a row of heavier tomes, bound in cracked red leather. Inside, on one of the first pages, a single line had been written in delicate script, "Pour mon esprit tranquille," for my tranquil mind, that no one has ever confirmed who wrote it. Some believe it was Frederick himself, a small private blessing, perhaps meant as a reminder of why he sought such calm. Others think it belonged to one of his guests, maybe Voltaire, leaving behind a quiet note like a sigh between friends. The ink, when examined, was slightly lighter than that of Frederick's known hand, though not entirely different. It is the kind of mystery that fits perfectly in a room like this, gentle, unresolved, and untroubled by the need for an answer. You move slowly through the rows, your fingertips brushing the edges of books that have not been opened for centuries. The titles are gold-leafed, barely visible under layers of time. Some are about music, others about mathematics, many about governance, but most belong to the world of philosophy. Frederick often said that ideas were a kind of company, that even in solitude, one was never truly alone while reading. Perhaps that's why his library feels so alive even now. It hums with invisible conversation, as though the pages are still whispering to one another when no one is listening. A candle on the desk burns low, its flame small but steady. Wax is pooled beneath it in neat circles, each layer marking an hour lost to reflection. You imagine Frederick leaning over a page, his breath stirring the flame ever so slightly, as he reads aloud to himself in French, his voice no louder than the ticking of a clock. He must have loved the rhythm of such nights. The tea beside him cooling slowly, the pen resting untouched, the world outside dimming into stillness. There's something almost meditative about it, the way thought and time can merge, when the body is still and the mind is free to wander. You sit for a moment in his chair. It's firm, but not uncomfortable. The leather is cool against your hands. You look around at the endless shelves, and you can feel the calm that must have wrapped around him like a cloak. The kind of peace that doesn't demand anything, that simply is. The wind outside moves faintly against the windows. It sounds soft and regular, like breathing. The candlelight flickers over the spines of the books, creating ripples of gold that move as gently as the surface of a pond. You think of how many nights must have passed this way, unchanging and quiet, a kingdom ruled by silence. Some historians have said that Frederick's library was his truest court, that in this room of thought he found more counsel than in all his generals combined. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps this was the only place where he could be both. King and man, surrounded not by subjects, but by minds he respected. It's strange how centuries of wisdom rest so quietly here unhurried, serene, as if the books themselves breathe in rhythm with time. They wait, and in their patience they teach. The air softens, inviting you to listen, to understand why Frederick came here, not to flee, but to be still. The candle burns low. The shadows lean closer. The library is still, yet quietly alive, watching, breathing, holding space for calm. And for this night, that quiet belongs entirely to you. The night drifts deeper, and somewhere beyond the tall windows of Sanssouci, the first drops begin to fall. It starts quietly like fingertips brushing silk before gathering into a slow, steady rhythm. The rain comes not as a storm, but as a whispering guest, the kind that knows the palace well and never rushes to announce its arrival. You stand near the window, feeling the subtle pulse of water against the glass. The candles tremble just slightly, their flames bending as if listening. Outside, the gardens of Sanssouci melt into a haze of silver, each terrace and statue blurred beneath the fine, veiled mist. The vines that crawl up the marble railings glisten with tiny jewels of rain, catching the faint glow that leaks from the room behind you. This was Frederick's favorite weather. When the skies turned gray and soft, he would sit at his writing desk with a pot of tea beside him, the porcelain steaming like a quiet thought. He once told a court musician that rain was the sound of clear thinking, that the gentle repetition of each drop helped sweep away the noise of command and battle, leaving only the rhythm of the mind. Tonight, you can almost feel that same clarity. The sound of the rain settles into its pattern, measured, precise, yet endlessly fluid. It patters on the roof tiles, slides down the window panes, and gathers in tiny puddles on the balcony outside. The air cools with every minute, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and earth, a perfume that feels as old as the palace itself. Frederick would often write during such evenings. His letters, some addressed to Voltaire, others to generals or scholars, were filled with a kind of steady calm, like sentences built from rain. His handwriting, neat and deliberate, curved gently across the page as though it, too, were following the rhythm outside. It said that he believed rain made thought more honest, that when the world grew quiet and blurred, one could hear one's own heart without interference. Perhaps that's why so many of his reflections were written beneath the same kind of sky letters about art, about reason, about what it meant to be both ruler and dreamer. You imagine him there now, seated beneath the golden clock, the lamplight soft on his face. His quill moves slowly, pausing between words. He listens, waits, and lets the sound of water decide the pace. Sometimes he looks up from the page, not at the rain itself, but through it, as if the drifting patterns might reveal a thought just out of reach. There's comfort in this slowness. The palace, so vast by day, feels smaller now, wrapped in a cocoon of sound. Every corridor is softened, every echo dissolved. Even the ticking of the clocks seems gentler, subdued by the rhythm outside. On the table, his cup of Bohemian tea cools to the perfect temperature. The steam rises in thin threads, meeting the faint chill that seeps through the window's frame. The two mingle, the warmth of the tea and the cool breath of the rain, until the air around him seems to hum with balance. He takes a sip. The flavor is deep and earthy, touched with honey and the memory of sunlight. Outside, the rain thickens just slightly, a new layer of sound unfolding over the first. It's like listening to harmony made entirely of water, some say. Frederick's habit of writing in the rain began after one particular evening in 1756, on the eve of war. He had spent hours pacing in his study, restless and uneasy, until the sky opened and the rain began to fall. He stopped moving then, sat at his desk, and wrote for nearly 2 hours straight. Later, when asked how he found his calm, he smiled faintly and said, "The rain decided for me." You can understand now the way rain can turn thought into something tangible, something that feels as though it's being washed clean with every word. The sound doesn't demand attention. It simply exists steady and kind, allowing the mind to loosen its grip, The garden below is almost invisible now, shrouded in mist. The statues of Pan and the muses stand like ghosts, their marble softened by the sheen of water. Somewhere among the vines, a night bird gives a single note and falls silent again. Even the sparrows that used to gather on the terrace have hidden away, their absence part of the quiet. Inside, the only light is from the candles. Their glow turns the rain into strings of gold on the glass, each droplet sliding like a small comet. The room feels half dream, half memory. You can imagine that Frederick is still here, still writing, still listening. Perhaps he never really left. There's a tenderness to nights like this, the way everything slows, as if time itself were steeped in tea. The rain asks for nothing but patience. It teaches the same lesson Frederick practiced each evening, to move gently, to listen more than one speaks, to let thought flow at its own pace. You take a breath and feel how the air moves between warmth and cool, between inside and out. It's a delicate boundary, as fragile as the skin of a bubble. And in that fragile space, a kind of peace blooms, the quiet recognition that all things, even kings and rainstorms, eventually dissolve into stillness. The letter on the desk is nearly finished. Frederick's quill hesitates above the final line. The rain, as if sensing the pause, softens once more, its voice dropping to a whisper. He smiles, writes one last sentence, and sets the pen aside. Outside, the sky breathes. The garden exhales mist. Inside, the tea's final warmth fades into the cool of the air. The palace listens to itself, wrapped in the calm of falling water dot, and you standing there, the hush of the library. Window feel yourself sinking into that same rhythm, into the steady, endless rain over Potsdam. Nothing more is needed. Only this sound, this peace, this gentle reminder that thought and rest can be one and the same. The rain has quieted to a soft mist by the time you find yourself in another part of the palace. The halls are long and cool, filled with the faint scent of wax and paper. A single door stands slightly ajar, and from within comes a faint golden shimmer, the glow of candlelight reflected across glass and ink. You step closer, and the quiet deepens. This is the map room, Frederick's retreat within a retreat. The place where the world was once arranged, line by careful line, across parchment and imagination. The room is round, its walls lined with tall cabinets that hold maps of distant lands, the frontiers of Prussia, the coasts of Italy, the river veins of France. Each map bears the marks of time, smudges of ink, fingerprints, tiny folds softened by years of touch. The air feels still, as though even sound has agreed to pause. On the central table, an enormous map lies open, Europe spread out beneath a film of candlelight. The edges curl slightly where the parchment meets the air. You can see tiny symbols, delicate notations in Frederick's neat hand, drawn with meticulous care. The ink has faded to brown, and near the top, the region of Silesia glows faintly under the trembling flame. It was once a name of victory. The Silesian Wars had carved Frederick's rule into history, shaping the destiny of Prussia and the course of his reign. But now, in this quiet hour, there is no triumph here, only stillness. The map seems less like a record of conquest, and more like a memory that refuses to fade. He would often come here after his tea, walking slowly through the corridors until the sounds of the palace disappeared behind him. Alone among these maps, he would stand motionless for long minutes, eyes tracing the familiar lines of rivers and borders. The candles burned low, and the shadows of the mountains rose and fell with every flicker of the flame. Tonight, you can almost see him, a solitary figure before the table, his robe gathered at the wrists, his posture calm but unreadable. The light touches his face, revealing not power, but thought, a kind of distance that comes when one looks too long at a map and begins to see more than geography. He reaches for a quill, but does not write. The ink pot beside him remains untouched. Instead, his gaze lingers on Silesia, that cluster of towns and rivers that once demanded so much from him. It's said that after the wars, after the treaties and triumphs, Frederick rarely spoke of it again. The land was won, the borders drawn, but the memory, it seems, stayed buried beneath the calm surface of his later years. After that time, his journals grew silent about Silesia, no mention, not even a fleeting note. Historians have searched for traces, unfinished letters, abandoned drafts, hidden reflections. Yet nothing was ever found. It is as if that chapter of his life had been quietly folded shut, sealed like an unsent letter, and left here, resting on this table, untouched by time. The map before you glows faintly as the candles sway. The wax drips down in slow, translucent rivers, pooling at the base of the holders. The smell of parchment and soot fills the room, soft and dry. Somewhere in the corner, the faint crackle of the hearth breaks the silence, but only barely. This is not the silence of emptiness, though. It is the silence of restraint, of someone who has already spoken too much to the world, and now chooses stillness instead. You can feel that same quiet wrapping around you, like a warm cloak. It invites no questions, no judgment. Only observation. The map itself seems to breathe. The rivers shimmer faintly with the candlelight, and the tiny inked cities almost pulse as the shadows move. You imagine what it must have been like, to see the world reduced to inches of parchment, to hold history between fingertips. The temptation to move a border, to adjust a coastline, must have felt almost divine. Yet Frederick, even in his solitude, treated these maps not as tools of control, but of contemplation. He once told a visitor that maps are not power. They are memory. The visitor wrote it down, puzzled by the remark, but perhaps here, in this silent room, you begin to understand. The borders of a map may define nations, but the act of drawing them also defines the person who does it, shaping not just empires, but inner landscapes of thought and regret. The candles burn lower. Their light thickens to amber. Dust drifts through the air, caught in the glow like suspended time. You notice the faint hum of the golden clock far down the corridor, a gentle, rhythmic heartbeat that threads its way through the silence. Frederick stands still. Perhaps he is remembering. Perhaps he is not remembering at all. The difference, at this hour, hardly matters. What remains is the map, open, waiting, endless, and the quiet companionship of the rain still brushing faintly against the windows beyond the walls. He takes a step back, his hand hovering above Silesia once more. The shadow of his fingers crosses rivers, towns, and borders. Then he lets it fall away. The candle nearest him gutters, a tiny tremor of light, and the map's surface darkens in that spot, as if a memory had finally exhaled. When he leaves, he does not extinguish the flame. He simply closes the door behind him, allowing the candlelight to flicker one last time across the fading ink dot, and now the room settles into perfect stillness. Beyond the window, rain begins again, soft, steady, almost shy, tracing silver threads down the glass. The sound folds itself into the quiet like a familiar refrain. On the desk, the map remains open, its faded lines gleaming faintly in the lamplight, as if remembering the hands that once traced them. No movement, no voice, only the hush of paper and breath. The air feels heavy, yet tender, carrying the weight of presence long departed. Its silence, like his, does not vanish, it simply becomes complete. The palace is quieter now, the kind of stillness that arrives only after many hours of peace. The air carries the faintest trace of tea and beeswax, and the candles along the corridor have burned to small golden domes. Somewhere deep within Sanssouci, soft footsteps glide across the floor, careful, practiced, an almost weightless dot, it is the hour of the evening servant. A time when the rituals of the day are folded gently into their resting places. You can almost hear the rhythm of his movements before you see him. The slight rustle of linen sleeves, the muted clink of porcelain being lifted, and the whisper of polished shoes against marble. He moves through the corridor like a shadow, trained in kindness, his steps precise, his breathing steady. There is no hurry, no hesitation, only the quiet perfection of repetition. Frederick's tea ritual had always been more than habit. It was a sacred rhythm that extended beyond himself, and those who served him learned to move in harmony with it. 3 attendants were trained specifically for this purpose, each schooled in the precise gestures of silence. They were not merely servants. They were keepers of calm, guardians of the fragile peace that settled over Sanssouci each night. The evening servant, the youngest of the 3, enters the tea room with deliberate grace. His hands are steady as he gathers the teacup, still warm from its last sip. The cup rests upon a saucer painted with blue vines, mice in porcelain gleaming like moonlight. He lifts it carefully, as though lifting the echo of the king's thoughts. The fire in the hearth has shrunk to embers, glowing with a faint orange breath. He pauses before it, sensing the stillness that Frederick always demanded during this hour. Even in the king's absence, the rule of silence remains. To speak here would feel like breaking a spell. On the porcelain table, a single silver spoon catches the candlelight. Its handle curves delicately, engraved with the faint initials Fr. The servant looks at it for a moment, not directly, but through the reflection of the flame, and then places it back beside the empty cup. The gesture is small, reverent, and filled with memory. There was once another servant who stood here, years before, an older man, precise and quiet, who vanished one winter without word or sign. All that was found the next morning was his uniform folded neatly on the chair, and beside it a single silver spoon, identical to this one. The palace never spoke of it aloud, yet the story drifted through generations of attendants like a slow, invisible current. No one ever learned what became of him. His name faded from the records, but his absence remained, a space filled by ritual, by quiet footsteps that continued as if to preserve the shape of his memory. Some said that on certain nights the candle near the porcelain table flickered without cause, just once, as though greeting someone unseen. The evening servant has heard these stories, but never repeats them. They are part of the silence he has sworn to maintain. He moves now toward the tray, arranging each item in the precise order Frederick once required, cup and saucer first, then the silver spoon, then the folded napkin with its soft scent of starch and rosewater. Each piece returns to its place, as though time itself had been carefully rewound. From the open door, a cool breeze drifts in from the garden. The scent of rain still lingers, mixed now with the faint fragrance of damp vines and stone. The servant looks out for a moment. The terraces gleam faintly under moonlight, each drop of water catching silver like dust. Somewhere, the statue of Pan glistens beneath the vines. Watching in quiet amusement, he turns back to his task, lighting one final candle on the table's edge. Its flame rises gently, then steadies, casting a soft circle of warmth across the porcelain. The light touches every surface, the curve of the cup, the trace of steam still lingering in the air, and then rests on the spoon, where it shimmers faintly like a drop of mercury. The servant watches it a moment longer than necessary. Perhaps it's only the reflection of the flame, but for a heartbeat, it feels as though the spoon itself breathes. He blinks, and the illusion fades. There is something almost meditative in the way he moves. To clean, to arrange, to preserve, these are quiet acts of devotion. In the grand hall of history, such gestures go unrecorded, yet they are the invisible architecture that holds calm together. Without them, the silence would collapse. Frederick understood this. He valued the still precision of those who served him, often more than the loud flattery of courtiers. In his own notes, he once wrote, "Silence is the rarest courtesy." Perhaps it was these very hands, the hands of his servants, that taught him this truth. The clock down the hall gives a single, muted chime. Midnight approaches. The servant finishes his work, folds the napkin with exact corners, and sets it atop the tray. He looks around the room once more, at the candles, the porcelain, the shadowed corners, as if to make sure the air itself remains undisturbed. Then, with the same grace as before, he lifts the tray and turns toward the corridor. His reflection follows him in the glass of the window, a slim figure surrounded by candlelight, vanishing slowly into the darker halls beyond. His footsteps fade, dissolving into the hush that follows. The door closes with a sound so gentle, it feels more like a sigh than emotion. What remains is stillness, warm, golden, and complete. The air seems to hold its breath, reluctant to disturb what lingers here. Candlelight drifts over the porcelain table, where the silver spoon lies untouched, perfectly aligned, as if awaiting his return. Its surface catches the faintest shimmer, a memory of movement now long gone. Nothing stirs, yet everything feels quietly alive. In this calm, time neither advances nor retreats. It simply rests. And so, in the dim serenity of Sanssouci, even absence glows with the grace of presence. The night grows deeper, and the air within Sanssouci thickens with calm. The sound of the outside world has vanished completely, leaving only the slow breathing of the palace, the faint creak of timber, the hush of fabric moving against stone. You find yourself again in the king's library, where the fragrance of old leather and polished oak forms an invisible canopy over the room. It is here that two worlds always met, thought and taste. Frederick's tea hour was never far from his books, and his books were never far from his cup. The air carries a subtle scent tonight, something familiar, something with that soft citrus edge that teases the mind before it soothes it. It is bergamot, faint but unmistakable, mingling with the musk of parchment and the dry sweetness of aged bindings. You breathe it in, and it feels like reading a sentence without words. The scent itself carries meaning, layered and refined. Frederick often spoke, or rather wrote, about this invisible conversation between senses. In one of his notes, found years later between pages of a French essay, he wrote, "The aroma of tea can be a philosophy of its own." He was known for his love of a particular blend that mirrored what we now call Earl Grey, a tea perfumed with bergamot, floral and contemplative. History tells us Earl Grey would not appear until decades after Frederick's time, yet some historians whisper that the Prussian king might have inspired it. In the quiet of Sanssouci, he had his own recipe, one no servant could reproduce exactly. The legend goes that he mixed the tea leaves himself, measuring them with the same precision he applied to his sonatas. 3 parts Bohemian leaf, 1 part citrus peel, and a few drops of oil distilled from fruit brought by merchants from the Mediterranean. It was not recorded officially, yet the faint residue of the scent remained in one of his porcelain canisters long after his death. You can almost imagine the ritual, the kettle resting beside a pile of books, steam rising gently across open pages, forming temporary clouds over sentences of Voltaire. The candlelight shimmers against brass clasps, and the golden surface of the tea catches glints of warmth that flicker like thought itself. The line between reading and drinking becomes blurred, each sip a form of reflection, each paragraph a pause in flavor. The room around you hums with the quiet weight of knowledge. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, each filled with spines too delicate to touch. The bindings are dark, their leather smoothed by time and careful hands. There is a small ladder near the far wall, polished by centuries of use. Frederick had it designed with wheels that glided in silence, so he could reach higher shelves without breaking his nightly quiet. On one of the lower tables rests a book, its cover warm but elegant. When opened, it reveals faint handwriting in the margins, delicate French words written at an angle. Pour mon esprit tranquille. For my peaceful mind. No one knows whose hand wrote it. Some say it was Voltaire's, others that it was Frederick's own, written in a moment of reflection between two paragraphs of philosophy. The scent of bergamot grows slightly stronger as the candle wavers. It's almost as if the aroma answers the book's inscription, a fragrant translation of tranquility itself. You might imagine the king sitting there, cup in hand, eyes half closed, reading a page he has already memorized but finds comfort in revisiting. His breathing is slow, deliberate, perfectly timed with the rhythm of the clock somewhere behind him. There is something soothing about his precision, not mechanical, but musical. Even his thoughts seem to keep tempo. He was a man of discipline, yet his nights were filled not with conquest or command, but with quiet acts of observation, the swirl of steam, the flicker of wax, the way light curved around a quill's shadow. One of his attendants once wrote, in a journal now held in Berlin, that the king preferred the scent of bergamot to incense, claiming it cleared the head more effectively than prayer. It was a statement equal parts rational and poetic, a blend as precise as his tea. You take in the scene as though it were unfolding in slow motion. The candle dips lower, and the pool of light shrinks to a soft oval that barely touches the book's edge. The tea, now cool, sits within reach, its surface perfectly still. The fragrance lingers, half memory, half reality. Historians still discuss whether Frederick truly created his own proto-Earl Grey blend. Some say the idea came from his fascination with the East India trade. Others believe he simply enjoyed experimenting with scents as he did with harmonies. Whatever the truth, the result was unmistakable. A drink that carried both brightness and restraint, like the man himself. The moment feels timeless. You can almost hear the faint scratch of a quill as he notes something on a nearby sheet, perhaps a thought about philosophy, perhaps a sketch of a melody. He pauses, takes a sip, and the taste settles over his tongue like the echo of calm reason. Outside, the night has deepened to a shade close to velvet. The air through the window smells faintly of pine and rain, mixing with the bergamot until you cannot tell where nature ends and ritual begins. The library breathes slowly, content with its silence. Frederick closes the book and places it softly beside the cup. The faint touch of porcelain against wood echoes like a single piano note in the stillness. The candle flickers, then steadies once more, its small flame seeming to nod in quiet agreement, keeping the night's secret safe within its glow. The scent lingers bergamot, leather, wax, and paper suspended in the air like an unfinished thought. It is the fragrance of contemplation, of gentle intellect and patient calm, a peace found only in solitude. Standing within that hush, you understand. This was Frederick's quiet masterpiece, a harmony of thought, tea, and stillness. The candle wanes. The air cools. Sanssouci exhales softly, sinking once more into its tranquil dream. The night outside is a vast, unbroken silence. Beyond the windows of Sanssouci, the air gleams with a cold, steady light, moonlight, pale as porcelain, spreading over terraces and statues, over the sleeping gardens of Potsdam. The world seems to have paused its breathing. Even the fountains, drained for the season, glimmer like sheets of glass beneath the October sky. Frederick steps through the long corridor that leads to the balcony. His footsteps echo faintly, but the sound fades before it can reach the end of the hall. The last traces of bergamot still cling to him, a whisper of warmth within the crisp night. He opens the tall window, and the cool air drifts in, bringing with it the scent of damp stone and cypress. Before him, the moon rests high above the white colonnades. Each column reflects its light like a blade drawn from a sheath. The dome of the palace shimmers, turning silver at the edges. The world below feels perfectly ordered, perfectly still, a geometry of light and shadow, so exact that it might have been drawn by compass. He stands there for a long while, his cup empty, his hands clasped behind his back. There is no music now, no page left to read. Only the moon, round and patient, gazing back at him. For Frederick, this was often the last ritual of the evening. After the final sip of tea, he would let silence take its place. And then, when the silence became complete, he would look up history records that he spent many nights observing the heavens. His journals contain small notations, sketches of constellations, the positions of Jupiter and Venus, the angles of their approach. They are drawn with military precision, as if he were mapping a campaign across the sky. Yet beneath the lines of ink, there is something gentler, something closer to devotion. That one marginal note reads, "The stars are like quiet counselors. They never interrupt." And another, written in a more hurried hand, "The moonlight allows one to hear one's own thoughts." It is an odd statement, almost mystical for a man of reason. But standing here, within the silver glow of Sanssouci's terraces, you begin to understand what he meant. The light of the moon softens everything, not just the marble and the trees, but the noise within the mind. It does not illuminate in the way the sun does. It reveals by calming. The garden below is an orchestra of stillness. The shadows of vines fall in long, graceful curves across the gravel. The statues of the muses seem half alive, their faces lifted toward the same sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, then is silent. Even the air feels slower, as though it too obeys the king's discipline of quiet. Frederick leans against the stone balustrade, tracing the curve of the horizon with his gaze. To the east, the forest glows faintly where the river bends. To the west, the hills fade into the night. The entire landscape of Potsdam lies before him, ordered and serene, a kingdom of geometry and moonlight. He thinks, perhaps of his youth, of the years when noise ruled his life, the clash of armies, the endless debates of court, the restless machinery of politics. All of that seems impossibly distant now, as though belonging to another lifetime. In this hour, he is not the philosopher king, nor the strategist, but simply a man standing beneath the moon, measuring his solitude. The clock inside the palace strikes once, a soft, golden tone that carries across the night. It does not disturb him. It only marks the rhythm he already feels. The tick, the breath, the pulse of the stars, all fall into a single cadence. Time, for this brief interval, is not a ruler but a companion. He lowers his gaze to the cup beside him. A single drop of tea remains at the bottom, catching the moonlight like a small mirror. He studies it, then smiles faintly. In that reflection, distorted by porcelain and silver light, the moon appears twice, one above, one within. Perhaps he writes a thought in his mind, one that will never reach paper. The world is clearest when it is quiet enough to listen to itself. The wind shifts gently, moving through the vines that cling to the columns. It sounds almost like a sigh. The leaves shimmer, the statues gleam, and the light deepens into that strange blue that exists only at midnight. The palace seems to hold its breath, as if aware that someone is watching, or being watched. Historians have long debated the meaning of Frederick's nightly vigils. Some call them a philosopher's meditations, others the habit of a man too disciplined to sleep. But perhaps they were something simpler, a dialogue between the finite and the infinite, between the mind that plans and the moon that simply is. The air cools. He half closes the window, but keeps watching. A pale mist drifts above the trees, moonlight threading through like breath through silk. For a moment, everything blurs: the columns, the gardens, even the king himself, as if the night has quietly gathered him in, erasing presence without ever breaking the stillness inside. The library lamp flickers once, then steadies. The scent of bergamot has faded completely now, replaced by the metallic clarity of the night. Yet its memory lingers, as does the warmth of the ritual, tea, thought, and light, each dissolving quietly into the next. Frederick turns away at last, closing the window behind him. The reflection of the moon slides across the glass, then disappears. The corridor greets him again with its deep hush, its steady rhythm of echoing steps. Somewhere behind him, the moon continues its watch over Sanssouci, washing its walls in pale serenity. It will outlast every candle, every clock, every breath within those rooms. And perhaps that is what Frederick sought each night. Not eternity, but a glimpse of stillness, vast enough to hold a single, peaceful thought. The night remains unbroken. The moon, constant and patient, looks down upon the empty cup, the closed window, and the silent palace, a companion to the end. The night deepens over Sanssouci, folding the palace in a velvet hush. Candles burn low, their wax pooling in delicate porcelain dishes, and the air carries a faint trace of bergamot, parchment, and cooled flame. Beyond the walls, the gardens breathe a pale mist that rises slowly through the moonlight, as if nature itself prepares to rest. The world has narrowed to this room, a chamber of stillness and slow, deliberate thought. Frederick sits at his desk, a single lamp casting its circle of gold upon the open page. The light touches the ink, the edge of the quill, the calm line of his hand. All else remains in shadow, softened by the hour. Around him, every object seems conscious of its place. The porcelain cup, the folded napkin, the clock that ticks with patient precision. This is the hour when thought becomes quiet enough to hear itself breathe. He has been writing for some time, though his words no longer concern the matters that once filled his days, not diplomacy, not strategy, not music to be played before court. What remains are fragments, observations, small reflections caught between sentences. Thoughts without audience, born not to be remembered, but to be understood. He pauses, dips his quill once more, and allows the ink to gather before it touches the page. The sound is soft, the faintest scratch, a rhythm steady as heartbeat. On the paper before him, he writes 3 simple words. Each letter forms with care, as though shaped by ritual. Tea, tranquility, and thought. The ink glistens while it dries, dark at the center and pale at its edges, like a breath expanding and fading. He watches it quietly, seeing not just the words, but the calm they signify. Discipline made gentle, solitude made whole. This room has long been his sanctuary. The desk, carved from cherry wood, still bears the shallow grooves of earlier years, traces of a life written into its grain. The golden clock near the window continues its measured work, marking time without intrusion. Its tick is small but steady, the perfect companion to silence. To Frederick, this rhythm has always carried a kind of mercy, a reminder that time need not hurry, that it can move as tenderly as the hand that winds it. He listens to the clock as if it were music. Tick, pause, tick. The intervals fall into one, another like drops of rain on calm water. For a moment, he closes his eyes, letting the sound fold around him. There is comfort in this constancy, in knowing that something endures, even as everything else fades. When he opens his eyes again, the flame of the lamp flickers, then steadies, and the stillness resumes its quiet rule. The pages before him are nearly filled. He turns one, revealing a list of names, a few sketches, a notation of weather. Each detail feels ordinary, yet together they hold the pattern of a life measured not by conquest, but by contemplation. Outside, a faint wind stirs the branches of the linden trees. The sound reaches through the half-open window, a whisper of night, brushing against thought. History, tells that it was in this very chamber, in the late summer of 1786, that Frederick the Great would take his final rest. The world beyond these walls would continue, battles concluded, ministers replaced, treaties rewritten. But within Sanssouci, time would still. The silence he had tended all his life would become his final companion. An attendant would later note a quiet mystery. When they entered his chamber that morning, the teapot was still warm, a wisp of steam rising softly from the spout. No one knew if he had poured it moments before sleep, or if the warmth simply stayed. In time, it became legend, the ritual continuing beyond him. Eternal, unbroken. He sits now, unaware of how close that hour is drawn. His posture is upright yet unforced, his gaze resting somewhere beyond the flame. Shadows ripple across the walls, gentle as folded cloth. His breathing remains slow, even. There is no struggle, no grand moment of farewell, only the natural descent of stillness settling into stillness. He has learned, perhaps better than most, that endings arrive not with noise, but with release. His eyes drift toward the porcelain cup beside him. Inside it, the reflection of the lamp forms a small, perfect circle, a captured moon. He lifts the cup and inhales the faint sweetness that lingers from the leaves, Bohemian and light, touched with honeyed air. The tea has cooled, yet its fragrance endures. As he sips, the flavor unfolds like memory, familiar and complete. Beyond the window, the moon is lowering toward the horizon. The first shades of dawn begin to stir, delicate and gray. The terraces glimmer faintly as the mist begins to lift from the gardens. Statues regain their outlines. The vines catch pale light. The world is returning, slow and kind. Frederick sets the cup down, his fingers resting for a moment against its smooth surface. The warmth is faint but present. He leans back in his chair. The air shifts. A candle guttering near the edge of the desk steadies itself once more. His eyes close, not with effort, but with the ease of one who has already understood all that he needed to. The clock ticks softly, steady as breath. The ink dries, and the room exhales its golden quiet. If you were there, you might not notice the instant at all, only the hush that arrives when thought and breath become one. Hours drift by. Morning light gathers at the windows. When the attendants enter, the chamber remains untouched, the teacup still faintly warm, the quill resting beside the closed book on the final page. In calm handwriting, 3 words endure: tea, tranquility, and thought. No flourish, no farewell, just the essence of a life measured in grace and stillness. Outside, the mist turns to light, and the garden breathes anew. Yet within, silence remains, not absence, but presence, a lingering rhythm of peace. The king is gone, but the air remembers. His calm, like the scent of tea, drifts on. Morning unfolds gently over Sanssouci. The gardens glisten with dew, each leaf trembling in the first pale light. The terraces shimmer faintly, and the palace, once alive with quiet footsteps and the ritual calm of its master, now rests in serene stillness. Yet the stillness is not absence. It hums softly, like a held note that refuses to fade. The rooms seem to breathe, their air touched by memory. Somewhere within these gilded walls, the echo of porcelain, paper, and thought lingers, a quiet reminder that presence can outlast the living. The great king is gone, but his calm endures, woven into the morning itself, as tender and enduring as the light, inside the small tea room. The air carries a familiar scent, faint traces of Bohemian leaves and polished wood. Dust has not yet gathered. The servants, out of reverence, leave everything as it was. The porcelain table, the half-folded napkin, the ink bottle still near the edge of the desk. And there, by the window, rests the chair, a modest piece of carved oak with curved arms. Worn smooth by years of use. No one sits there now. The chair remains exactly where it has always been, facing the window, bathed in quiet light. Sunlight drifts across its wooden frame, tracing a thin golden line along the floorboards before fading into shadow. Dust moves lazily in the air, catching the light like slow, deliberate thoughts. Nothing disturbs the stillness, no footsteps, no voice, not even the faintest stir of fabric. It feels as though the room itself is waiting, listening for a presence long departed, a sound that will never come. Yet in that silence there is no sorrow, only the gentle patience of a space that remembers. Visitors to Sanssouci, in the years after his passing, often pause before that chair. Some speak in whispers, as if entering a chapel. Others say nothing at all. There is something in the air, not sorrow exactly, but an abiding calm. The same calm that Frederick himself once cultivated through every ritual. Every slow movement of pouring tea, every hour marked by the golden clock. Some say, the palace still breathes with his quiet rhythm. It is a phrase often repeated by caretakers, historians, and guests alike. And standing in that room, one can almost believe it. The silence feels measured, like a held note, a pause in a melody that has not truly ended. After his death, Sanssouci became a place of remembrance. The gardens were tended more carefully than ever, the rooms kept in order as he left them. Even the clocks continued their gentle ticking, synchronized to his final schedule. The ritual of quiet lived on, not through command, but through affection. A French visitor in the early 19th century recorded a curious memory. He entered the late king's study at dawn. When the first light touched the chair and made it seem as though its occupant had just risen. The air, he wrote, carried a faint aroma of tea, delicate, persistent, though no one had brewed any for many years. Others told similar stories, of a warmth that lingers near the desk, of a faint hum in the corridor at night, or the soft rattle of porcelain, though no hand had touched it. Many dismissed these as fancies, echoes of imagination. Yet the scent of tea, they said, was real. Each morning, when the windows were opened and the sunlight poured in, the fragrance of bergamot and honey would drift faintly through the room. It would fade by noon, return by dusk. No one could trace its source. No cup, no leaf, no hidden pot of tea. Just a scent, light, fleeting, and inexplicable. Perhaps it is memory itself that perfumes the air. Sanssouci was never a palace of grandeur, but a retreat of thought. Its marble and glass absorbed his solitude, his devotion to small, deliberate acts. The emptiness he left behind is not cold, it hums softly. Like the residue of a song dot in the garden, the statues stand as they always have. The vines curl around their bases, the fountains glint under the pale sun. Birds flit between the terraces, their wings brushing against the air that once carried the king's flute. The entire estate feels caught in a delicate balance between presence and absence. Inside, caretakers walk slowly through the corridors, careful not to disturb the alignment of furniture or the hush that fills each room. They know the palace holds something sacred, not a ghost, not a myth, but a rhythm. A pattern of stillness that belongs to no one and yet to everyone who listens. As evening descends, the light deepens to amber, washing gently across the walls. Shadows stretch long and soft over the porcelain table, tracing its delicate edges. The empty chair catches the final glow of day, holding it like a memory. For a brief, weightless moment, the room feels inhabited again, as though someone has only just risen, leaving behind a faint warmth, a whisper of movement, and a tender echo of their quiet, unhurried departure. Outside, the moon ascends above Potsdam, spreading its quiet silver across the terraces and tiled rooftops of Sanssouci. The same light that once guided Frederick's midnight walks now rests upon his empty chair, illuminating the stillness he left behind. It feels less like absence than continuation, a presence diffused into air, stone, and shadow. The room absorbs it all, breathing with a soft rhythm that time no longer measures. If you stand there long enough, listening to the hush, you might understand what visitors have whispered for centuries, that the palace does not mourn. It remembers. Not the echo of command, but the grace of calm, a peace that hums beneath the surface of silence. Perhaps that is what Sanssouci truly guards, not relics of power, but the residue of stillness. A lesson left behind in porcelain and paper, that tranquility, once found, does not fade. The wind moves through the curtains like a sigh. The clock ticks on, steady and patient, and somewhere in the cool night air, the faint fragrance of tea drifts once more, soft, invisible, eternal. Night has fallen once more over Sanssouci. The air is cool, touched by the faint perfume of vines that climb the terraced slopes above Potsdam. The moon rests high and patient, pouring silver light over the curved roofs and marble balustrades. Down below, among the quiet rows of grapevines, lies the resting place of Frederick the Great, the king who once ruled through reason. Music and tea. You walk slowly through the garden, the gravel crunching softly beneath your shoes. Every leaf shivers under the breath of the night wind. The statues seem half awake, their stone faces serene. Above, the stars scatter across the sky like pinpricks in deep velvet. The air feels still but alive, as though even the darkness here carries memory. Frederick chose this place himself. He had written that he wished to rest among my dogs, close to my vines. And here he lies, not in a cathedral nor a fortress, but beneath the open air, exactly as he desired. The tomb is simple, flat stone, carved only with his name. No crown, no grand inscription. Just calm permanence dot the garden hums softly with its own quiet life. Crickets thread their song through the stillness, and somewhere nearby, a fountain whispers as water folds endlessly over stone. The sound is gentle, patient, without urgency, a rhythm that feels both ancient and new, guiding the night in slow, even pulses. Each ripple, each chirp, seems to echo the steady breath of the earth itself. You find yourself breathing in time with it, without intention, as though the garden has quietly taught you how. In this calm, nothing presses forward. Everything simply is, perfectly at ease, within the rhythm of stillness. You can imagine him here still. The man who once rose before dawn to study the sky, who paused each evening to steep his tea in quiet concentration. His empire once stretched wide across Europe. Yet his peace was found not in conquest, but in the still moment between two sips of warmth. There is a story, part history, part whispered legend, that his final evening unfolded as every other had. The same porcelain cup rested by his hand, the same chair faced the dimming light, the same brief silence held the air. Nothing seemed different, only quieter. When morning arrived, they found the tea still faintly warm, a thin wisp of steam rising as if time itself had paused beside him. Some said it was coincidence. Others believed the warmth lingered out of devotion. Perhaps in that moment, the ritual had continued on its own, serene, unbroken, eternal. Centuries have passed, yet the serenity above his resting place remains. The vines sway gently, deliberate and unhurried, as though time itself has softened here. Moonlight drifts across the inscription, pale and forgiving, and even the earth seems to inhale and exhale more slowly, carrying the quiet legacy of a life lived in calm and contemplation. The air hums with a patient stillness, a reminder that peace, once cultivated, endures beyond the reach of years. If you listen closely, you might almost hear it, a faint echo of flute music, a melody barely formed. It rises and falls like a sigh, dissolving before your mind can hold it. The air cools against your skin. You feel the quiet around you deepen, layer by layer, like silk folded over silk. Frederick's peace is not the silence of absence, but the fullness of rest, the stillness that follows completion. Every ritual, every note, every letter, every cup of tea, it all converged here, under this patient sky. His life, with all its motion and thought, has folded gently into the same rhythm that once guided his hand as he stirred his tea. 3 times and waited 4 minutes. You take one slow breath, then another. The scent of distant tea seems to return, faint and sweet. You can almost taste it, the warmth of honey, the softness of herbs, the whisper of bergamot. The world narrows to this moment, to this calm, to this air that feels like a pause between thoughts. It's easy to believe that time forgets to move at Sanssouci. The moon drifts above the terraces. The vines breathe softly against the walls. And every sound seems to follow an ancient, unbroken rhythm. The rhythm of a man who once cherished silence more deeply than triumph. Nothing here ends. Everything lingers, slow and circular, like the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. In this stillness, even absence feels full, alive with memory and breath. The air carries his calm, the gardens echo his patience, and the palace continues to dream in his stead. And now, as you stand within that hush, you realize this peace was never his alone. It waits quietly, still, for anyone willing to listen. Now, as you close your eyes, imagine a single candle still burning on the porcelain table. Its flame flickers softly, a slow dance that keeps time with your breathing. The air carries a trace of warmth, the faint perfume of tea leaves steeping in porcelain. The sound of the night is gentle, the wind against the glass, a whisper through the vines, a quiet hum of a world that asks for nothing. You feel the softness of the moment wrap around you like a blanket. The weight of the day lifts, replaced by the calm certainty that nothing needs to be done. The candle glows a little dimmer, and the air thickens with stillness. Frederick found his peace through simplicity, through music, tea, and silence. And now, as you breathe slowly, you can find yours too. With each exhale, let your thoughts drift farther away, like steam dissolving into cool air. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the rhythm of your heartbeat match the steady ticking of an unseen clock. The moon keeps its gentle watch above, silver and patient. The garden lies in perfect stillness, every leaf folded into rest. The world grows small, softened by night's calm embrace. Sleep deeply now, dear listener. The king slumbers beneath his vines, and in this quiet hour, you share his peace. The same moon, the same silence, the same enduring calm. End of script. Thank you for listening, everyone.